Welcome back to Masters of Modern. I'm your host, Alex Kessler, back at the office. This is a temporary thing, but there's things, cards, cardboard cutouts all around me, and I have a very special guest, first time on the show. Michelle, hello.
Hello. So nice to be here. I don't have a bunch of cards. I just have some furniture. And...
Yeah, but there's like a cool Kamigawa box, I think I see like somewhere in the corner.
Yeah. I've got a Kamigawa box like in the background over there. That's pretty cool.
I'm very jealous.
This is my basically I've decided to create my little cottagecore basement. So we literally, there's only one window. It's over there. So I've tried to like pretend that this place is as light and airy as possible. So a lot of interior design research, and I'm pleased with the results. It's like equally nerdy but also cute. So I'm like quite pleased.
That's really cool. And you just moved to Boston, right? So it's a brand new setup. I love moving out of places is terrible. It's the moving in places part that I love, because it's like the first day of school back. I'm like putting all the pencils in the little pencil holders in my backpack. Everything's new, and then within 36 hours, all of it is no longer in those locations. And my backpack being crushed. But it's the moving in part I always like, because you get to reorganize and set everything up, and then I will never maintain that for the rest of my life.
For me, it's been like putting together a really big puzzle, right? Because that's kind of how interior design sort of works. It's sort of like, okay, I need to be realistic with my expectations and what my comfort level is, what my budget is, and figure out like what is the experience I want to have. I want someone else to have in this place. I like to think of it as almost like Imagineering. Like I'm a Disney nerd in the sense that I just love the attention to detail in all these places, especially in the theme parks and like all the rooms and whatnot. So I like to have that mindset whenever I quote unquote design a space, because I'm just like, oh, what kind of experience do I want people to have? What do I want them to notice? Like, what's their focal point? Like, if they stare at it enough, what new things will they pick up? So as a result, I drive myself absolutely up the wall trying to figure out like, how do I make this whimsical and delightful while also functional? It's very important.
Yeah, I'm a big, me and my wife have different beliefs on this, but she's definitely like, I don't want anything on countertops, minimal bookshelves. I want everything to be like very specific and placed and singly focused. And I'm like, how much wall space can I fill with art, and how many bookshelves can I pack with books and trinkets and comics and artwork or whatever? And so you definitely, like, when you go to our house, there's like my office, that's that, and then there's the rest of the house, which is her aesthetic. And I will admit hers definitely looks nicer. But so very briefly, can you let our listeners know, who you are, what type of content you've made in the past, and your background as a Magic person?
Gotcha. Yeah. Who are you? What are you doing here? So I am Michelle Rapp. You might know me from my general Twitterings, where I generally talk about Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, TTRPGs, the state of society, and bread. Just a lot of bread. I've been baking a lot, so you're probably going to see a lot of focaccia on my timeline, which I do not regret. Carbs are delicious. You might also know me from, I used to have a podcast about Magic lore called The Loregoyfs. We are on hiatus for a while. We will see if we come back together. But I have also written several articles for Card Kingdom. I've appeared on a few of their events, like the Chalice. I also used to work with a professor for a little bit, Brian, which was fun. I've basically kind of just been like hanging around, doing stuff with people, having a generally good time, which is nice. So you've existed in the general weird COVID moment of what is my relationship to this game, and what does the world look like, and how does one make content when who knows what is going on? It's very much been just like, now I will only see my friends from the chest up in perpetuity.
I know much less about what shoes everyone is wearing, and I know much more about what pets they have.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen so many cat asses in the past 3 years. It's just cat asses for days.
So today we're going to be talking about discard in Modern and a little history on 8-Rack as a deck, which is a deck that you've played in Modern in the past. We're going to talk about where the deck has gotten to, and then we're going to talk about lore, how the Magic lore is released, where it's at right now, how we feel about the lore that's going on in Kamigawa, which I personally am super excited by and have opinions on, and I assume you do as well. And so it'll be a fun little ride. So first, before we get into it, the show is made very possible by our patrons. We're doing a lot of new stuff on the Patreon. If you go there right now, you can sign up to get early release of the podcast. This comes out a week early. It comes with a whole bonus 15 to 20 minutes worth of content every week at the very beginning of it, where we talk about a bunch of stuff. Me and Michelle talked about all the different food we've eaten while traveling and how iced coffee doesn't exist and why it doesn't exist in other countries, or Europe specifically. We've discovered that it's just Europe that doesn't have iced coffee.
Why?
The heathens. That whole conversation is in the pre-show. Also, you now get early access 24 hours in advance of the podcast fully edited. So the video version also gets posted there on Mondays, where the podcast gets released on Tuesdays, plus other cool stuff that's going on there. So make sure to check that out as well. And then also, starting this month, we now are partnering with Alter Sleeves. There's a whole Alter Sleeve page. There's a link below to check out all the ones we've selected. And then we are planning on working on getting a exclusive Alter Sleeve done for the podcast for patrons only. So it's another reason to be a part of the Patreon. So you can help decide what we're doing. I think we're thinking of a Luris Alter, but you can help contribute and figure out what we want to do there, and definitely appreciate that. And then of course, Ultra Pro makes this podcast happen as well. And big shout out to them on top of that and all of their great products, and literally where I'm keeping all of my Magic cards as we talk, other than these giant cardboard cutout ones that I made on my industrial size printer.
I was about to say, how did you get them? They're so big.
I have, as a toy company person, access to a printer that prints 36 by infinity long paper.
That is such a very specific superpower.
Yes,
that
yeah.
is
And
awesome.
if you want a weird cardboard cutout of yourself, I have them of Ben and Michael. You might have to pay for shipping and freight, but I can make that. I have the ability to do that. So yeah. So for whenever we got a preview, these are all the cards we previewed. So we previewed all of these. Then behind the camera, I can maybe lift it up. Hopefully, it doesn't mess stuff up. We have Kess and Fatal Push and Claim to Fame and Merfolk Mistbinder on all the walls, because we've previewed those cards in the past. We used to print them out for cool video content.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was one of the benefits of having a toy company is abusing the weird equipment.
I mean, I would do the same thing in your case. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Please don't feel bad. That's awesome.
Very, very, very fun. So discard in Modern. For a long time, and until very recently, I always said discard is probably the main stopgap we've had available in the format, right? I've always said that Thoughtseize is our Force of Will, where, if you wanted to pick a deck that was here to punish people trying to do very linear strategies or strategies that rely on specific cards in Modern versus, in Legacy, where Force of Will is that kind of same stopgap with a little bit of a lesser extent Wasteland or Daze, Modern had Thoughtseize and Inquisition and Kozilek. I feel like that has changed, partially with printings of stuff like Force Negation and Solitude and all some of the other additional free counter spells and other interaction. But Thoughtseize is still, top 5 most played cards in the format. Inquisition and Kozilek isn't far behind that. And for a long time, and even to this day, still 5-0ing dailies, stuff like 8-Rack has been a big feature of the format. I mean, I think historically the most competitive podcast to this podcast in the Modern sphere was Turn 1 Thoughtseize, which was started as we're focused on 8-Rack that podcast that then evolved into a full Modern one. So yeah, and you've played a lot of it.
Yeah. So my history with Modern is it's like a sweet short summer fling back in 2015, 2016, something like that. I took I basically was looking at a bunch of decks to play for I think a PPTQ. And I was just like, what do I do? I don't really know. And so my friends started walking me through, all right, well, here are the different decks you could do. Here's, there's that. And at the time I had opened a Liliana of the Veil in an Innistrad draft, and it was like the most amazing thing. I think it was one of my first best Magic moments. So I was like, I have this. What do I do with it? And they said, oh, well, you can do 8-rack. 8-rack could be good. And this was back when it was still played in 8-rack. And I was like, okay, what's it all about? And so they went and showed me what it was at the time, which was, a lot of ensnaring bridges and that old chestnut. And I really enjoyed it in like a deep, satisfyingly sadistic way. It was basically, I like to compare it to kind of like capitalism at its worst, in the sense where I just take everything away from you and then I punish you for having nothing. So it was great in that regard. So I took it to the PPTQ, and I did not get anywhere with it because I was just there for fun, but I curb stomped everyone during the first match, during the first game of every match. It was just not something anyone saw coming. And then they were like, okay, now we're going to board in some artifact hate. And I'm like, okay, well, this is going to go badly. But I appreciated the first game, which usually ended in about 3 minutes. Where it was just like, I just take everything from you and you're dead. So,
or you get ran over, right? Like that's kind of like the swinginess of the deck is like, either I'm able to totally make it so you don't get to do anything, or you did something and I have no way to deal with that.
Yeah. I did have a few answers that it was mono black. I mean, I did have a few answers to sort of like try to get things off of the board. So that was a pretty fun. It was a pretty fun time, but yeah, I played it for a few months, and then for a little while, because of the Vorthos aspect of it, I was really excited by Jeskai Harbinger, because I mean, it's Nahiri bringing Emrakul, and I'm like, this is like the story. I love that. It makes me so happy. But didn't really get to take it out for any PPTQs, just 8-rack. But
right, that's when that deck started happening. Is kind of also the end of PTQs.
Yeah, basically. So I was like, well, I guess this is not happening anymore. So I'll just take these cards and look at them. just look at them real good. Yeah, but it was I really loved just sort of the efficiency of 8-rack. I loved the fact that it was that's something I really love about playing Magic, is like I like very elegant plays. I like something that's very efficient. Doesn't take too long, just gets right to the quick of it. And it's like beautifully, I don't like something, I mean, burn is also kind of like that, but I don't tend to like it quite as much. Something that's like a very efficient little Rube Goldberg machine, just like what 8-rack used to be, was precisely what I loved. So it's a deck that always has like a soft spot in my heart.
Well, one of the things that's cool about it is like it like burn is taking an axis of magic where you can attack someone on, and then leaning into it so hard that you accidentally win. And burn is damage to the face, and 8-rack is, and I guess to establish what 8-rack is, because it isn't a big piece of the metagame as much anymore, though it does still see play, and we'll talk about that in a second, is, it's leaning on this card, the Rack, which is an old card. Like it's been kind of the face of discard cards since basically Magic started existing. I think its first printing is it an alpha? Almost as old as you can be as a Magic card. And back then it was always a feast of pace of these discard decks, though discard was, more leaning on cards like Duress. Not creatures were very good back then, but was kind of one of the weird grandfathered cards into Modern, because it's on the time shifted sheet, and that's how it kind of always existed there. And then the card Shrieking then the card Shrieking Affliction was printed in Return to Ravnica. So now you have, which basically does the same thing. So Shrieking Affliction is 1 black enchantment at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. If that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 3 life. And the Rack is 1 mana at the end, 1 generic mana, so it's an artifact. At the end of target opponent's upkeep, the Rack deals that player 1 damage for each card in his or her hand, fewer than 3. So they both basically, for very efficient 1 mana cards, will slowly kill your opponent for having no cards in hand. And so then the rest of the deck, and on permanents that are hard to deal with. And so then the rest of the deck is here to make it so you don't have any cards in hand. And if you don't have any cards in hand, you are likely not winning.
Yeah.
Or killing you quickly. So you have your little artifacts that don't do anything but do like 3 damage to them once a turn, have the time to kill your opponent because you're preventing them from doing anything else without having any cards in hand or in play. And to give a little background on my background with the deck, so I've actually never played 8-Rack in Modern, but my number one legacy finish of all time is off of Smallpox, which is basically the translation of that deck into that format, where you don't win with the Rack or Shrieking Affliction. I don't know what they win with now, but back in the day, we were winning with Cursed Scroll, which lets me like do damage to a creature or opponent based on me naming a card at random from my hand, but I also didn't have any cards in hand. And playing Dark Ritual into Liliana the Veil on turn 1. That's generally how you won.
Yep, that's Dark Ritual into Liliana the Veil. Liliana the Veil was so great at the time. Oh, I miss such a good card.
Yeah, well, that's like not an argument for Lurrus being banned, but like that's kind of the main reason Liliana isn't seen play in the deck anymore, right? Is the decks that want Liliana are decks that want Lurrus, and they want Lurrus more than they want Liliana, and that's because right now the deck is seeing play, right? It's a Lurrus deck. It's playing 3 Dark Confidant, 3 Fatal Push, Funeral Charm, Inquisition of Kozilek, Thoughtseize, Smallpox, and then some of the just more efficient discard spells like Wrench Mine, Raven's Crime, and Funeral Charm as just like different ways to do it. It's playing an Urza's Saga package. It's playing Mishra's Baubles now because you have Lurrus, and Lurrus makes that deck. I think it's both the reason. I think though, if I were to like guess, and from the experience I've had playing against the deck now, Lurrus definitely feels to me like the reason this deck isn't as popular as it could be, because it is always going to be an available option at a speed that you can't get rid of with mostly sorcery speed discard. That just is always going to be able to rebuy cards. Like the draw engines of the format are so efficient and so difficult for a deck like 8-Rack to deal with that it feels like it would be really hard to kind of fight against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely been like generally tangentially aware of Lurrus's impact on Modern and how it's really just dominated that, and Ragavan have both just completely dominated a lot of what we see nowadays in the top few deck lists, which is a little sad. But I mean, I guess the argument is that it's still a healthy meta and it's going despite all of it. So
yeah, it's weird, right? Right now, Modern is in a position where there is a very large quantity of decks and strategies viable, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can pretty much play anything you want to play, including a discard. I mean, the other side of 8-Rack is that the red-black mid-range discard decks, which play a significant amount of the same cards with some cards that are upgrades, are seeing play and have top-aided semi-regularly different events. So it's not like this discard direct strategy has gone away. It's just moved into that red-black status. And one thing with 8-Rack, like, we joke that mono black is actually the only monocolor deck to never win a Pro Tour. Like every other color combo has, or not Pro Tour, a Grand Prix. And like one of the reasons that 8-Rack has always been so popular is its budget value. Even with Liliana the Veil, it has always been, the mana base is significantly less expensive because you don't have to deal with having fetch lands. You don't have to deal with having shock lands. Most of the cards other than Liliana and Thoughtseize were in the realm of $5 at most. Now, as different decks and different strategies got better or worse, like for instance, if you're playing the Dark Confidant version, that would, that's an extra $200 for the deck, but you don't have to play Dark Confidant. There's versions of the deck that we're seeing play that didn't rely on some of these more expensive cards. Liliana the Veil, for instance, right now isn't seeing play. So it is this great little onboard into the format that lets players play a control strategy. Right. That's one of the benefits of it versus, a lot of times people think like, oh, the only budget decks to get into a format like Modern are stuff like Affinity, Burn, Merfolk, Elves, all of these strategies that are generally going to be very like aggressively minded. And Smallpox gives that control player the ability to get into the format playing a deck that they like, that is still not within the same price point as some of the more, if I'd open up a Liliana, for most of Modern's history, your two options were 8-Rack or Jund. And Jund was a nice $5,000 and 8-Rack was a nice $300.
Yep. That was the main one of the main reasons why I actually chose 8-Rack, because at the time people were like, you could play Jund, you're just gonna need some Goyfs and all this Dark
Confidants and
yes, and all this other stuff. And I was like, I think, that's a big investment for someone who is thinking about Modern, not necessarily going to commit to it. So I'm going to go with this route, see how I feel. And I really loved it. I mean, I've had a chance to pilot a Gen deck on occasion and it's been fun, but I just, once again, like the clean, like discard option of 8-Rag was always just a thing of beauty in my mind. But go ahead.
I've also always liked 8-Rack as an onboarding location for people because its cards that are expensive are more versatile and more usable in other decks within the format, right? Like Merfolk, Affinity, Burn, even Tron, all of them are relatively inexpensive to get into. But one of the reasons they're relatively inexpensive to get into is because all of the cards you're buying are only playable in that deck.
Yeah.
You like Ravager is played in one deck. Now, two, Affinity is arguably gone, and now Hardened Scales is the deck that plays it, whatever. But Tron, like, Karn is expensive, but you're only using Karn in Tron or Commander.
Yeah.
And, but here, if you invest in Liliana's and then you slowly can pick up fetch lands and a Goyf, well, now Goyf's only $20, but, you can build into a strategy that is more tournament viable, but costs more while getting to play a deck that is not tournament viable, but is more of an onboarding style platform. So it is one of the nice things about this deck is it offers players a strategy that isn't as linear, gives them a more control-y feel while allowing them to invest in Modern in a way that has paths to grow that investment versus pigeonholing them into specific strategies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recognize that the flexibility of 8-Rack when I was playing it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really liked it at the time. I mean, I was able to, I just remember when I was playing that deck against various others, like being able to, before the sideboarding happened, kind of just match whatever was happening and be able to identify, okay, those are the main pieces that they need. Let's get rid of that right away because, of course, I don't want them to win. But yeah, when I think about like my deck now, I mean, of course, yeah, I guess I could definitely take whatever pieces I have in there and put them elsewhere. But gosh, I'm trying to remember the cost of a Goyf back then was like what, 200 something?
I think Goyf was never 2. I think it was like it was 100. It always like bounced around $100 to 120, and then it got down to 80 for a while, and it would go back to 100, and now it's
I'm thinking of a $20,
foil, which is an insane thing that I said.
Yeah, no, I can't. If you'd have told me 5 years ago that piece of cardboard was going to be only $20 in the future, I would have been like, oh, okay, that's nice.
Yeah,
I'm glad it happened.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is they just printed it a lot, right? Like people earlier on were trying to point out like, oh, but it's because it's not good and like people think it's about it, but it's like Jund is still one of the best decks in the format, and Goyf is a 4-of. It plays with Lurrus really well. It's just that they printed it in 5 Modern Masters sets plus a double Masters. I think plus Iconic Masters had it, and on top of that, you have the Time Spell Remaster version, and that's what tipped it over the edge. Was like. Time Spell Remastered was a set that had it in it and was printed at a like closer to regular dollars per pack price. And that finally pushed it over the edge to make it like, oh, this is now a $20 card. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, well, I wish other cards could see that same treatment, but
let's just print Ragavan 5 more times, please.
I mean, the joke is that a full art Ragavan is only $2, right?
I don't get it. Wait.
Oh, it's the token.
Oh, sure.
The token. Yeah, the token of Ragavan.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was like, I don't.
There's a full art. It's only $2. You can just get that.
Easy.
Super easy solution to that problem.
Yep. It was the player rewards card. You don't know. It's been they got that system back.
Yeah.
So yeah, and what's cool, I will say, is that the deck, the biggest change that looks like has really happened to the deck as it's seeing play now is the addition of Urza Saga, right? Like that definitely has given it the ability to have a very similar, it's the Lurrus plus Urza Saga combo that's seeing play in every deck in Modern, right? Where it's, I now have this access to this threat that is able to rebuy my threats, that's able to draw me into more cards to stop my opponent, fights their Lurruses. And I have Urza Saga, which always tutors either worst case scenario, I am guaranteed to have the rack in play on turn 3, no matter what happens. To the extent that it is now really 6 rack. They're no longer playing 4 Shrieking Afflictions, but they are playing, on the other hand, you could argue it's 10 rack because you have 4 Urza Saga, 4 racks, and 4 Shrieking Afflictions. So it's an interesting way that this deck has evolved. In the sideboard, you definitely see cool stuff like Torok Dread Cantor, which is like this perfect Hymn to Torok option that does work with Lurrus in a really cool way. Dwathi Voidwalker is in the sideboard as well, and then just more Urza Saga packages. And I think the one thing, and this is what I remember from Pox's era, is Graveyard Hate was so important to the extent that I was like packing 4 Leyline of the Voids and 2 Nil Spellbombs. And no, I think it was 4 Leyline of the Voids, a Nil Spellbomb, and 3 Surgical Extractions were my sideboard. And it was like, if I play against a graveyard deck, I am actively helping them. And so
yeah, no, I do remember the Surgical Extractions quite a bit, just being like, nope, get that out.
Well, and sometimes you just get them where it's like, oh, I thought Seize a card that you also still have in your hand and you got 2 of, and now I've now used these 2 cards to get 4 cards out from your hand, and you're so far behind now. Great. And yeah, so I do recommend this deck to people, and then kind of to the other version, which is the Rakdos one. And this is once again still Lurrus deck. This one isn't playing the Urza Saga package, though, because you get this library of just Dragon Rage Channeler, Ragavan, Kroxa, and just better removal with Unholy Heat, Colligan's Command. So it's much less of like a fully focused discard deck. It's more just I'm playing the full suite of Inquisitions and Thoughtseize. I'm playing and Kroxa instead of 8 racks, where you have this continuous access to a Titan that comes back every turn while discarding their hand, while doing damage, while being a 6/6, while escaping every turn and every other text on this card, etc.
So it's a little bit more multifaceted, but it looks like it's to its benefit here. Little bit more interaction and just sort of, a little bit more multi-purpose.
And as I said,
it's evolved.
Yeah, and it's kind of the point that, like, as I said before, you start with 8-rack, then you evolve that into Rakdos midrange, and then that evolves into Zoomer Jund, and then evolve. Like, as you slowly add these pieces, you're able to become a different deck, and it's still using all these stuff that you had before. So it is why I think it's the best entree into Modern of maybe any strategy.
Yeah. Babies.
Other than you're going to make your friends unhappy when you make them discard every card in their hands.
I mean, no one needed those people anyway.
Friends are overrated.
Magic is your only friend. You don't need other friends.
This is maybe a nightmare.
Just cackle silently on your own in your kitchen table. It'll be great.
But I will say, even from I've always said that my favorite decks to bring around with me are Jund and Jeskai, and that's because they have such a good interplay off of each other. And I think you could replace Jund in that conversation with an 8-rack deck. The end game part of that deck is a little bit more of a slog than a Jund, because you're not beating them down. My removal spells are less versatile, but you're still interacting. You're still going back and forth on spells you're casting and dealing with threats in play and removal spells to affect them, which I think is the best. To me, is my favorite version of Magic. Right? It's not 2 ships passing in the night. It's 2 ships trying to deal with the other ships with cannons. Yeah,
with cannons and just, I don't know, like bribing their sailors to come to your ship and then just leaving their ship unattended. It's a really interactive deck, and I think it rewards patience. It's one thing I dislike about, the kind of interactions that you were mentioning, where it's just 2 ships passing the night trying to each do their own thing the most quick, like the fastest, essentially. In this case, you've got something that actually, you need to pay attention. You need to understand. So I agree with your assessment that I think it's a really great, like, first deck, because it really teaches you to pay attention. It teaches you to be patient. It teaches you to pick your time.
And it's right now it's $574 for 8-rack. The dollars you're spending that are the most money are Urza Saga, which are, as long as it doesn't get banned, going to be an extremely versatile card to own, and in every format in Magic. Urborg to Yawgmoth, another one that's like a classic. A, could be reprinted at any moment. B, could be a card you only play 2 of. It can be one that you can maybe cut the corners on. Dark Confidant is the 3 Dark Confidants are $100, and that's another one that there are other options. Even in the sideboard, bringing in just the Torok, Dread Cantors, and instead, finding other solutions. Like that of the pieces, that is the one that is like the most easily replaced by other options. Be it Dwathi Voidwalker, be it Torok, Dread Cantor, be it even stuff like just like Feed the Swarm, which and removal spells or card draw spells that get you over there. So, and then everything else is like less than $50 for a playset. Like they're like Thoughtseize are $5-10 now. So it's not even the most, like it's so affordable to get into, and every card you're spending money on is worth owning at this point. Like I don't think Urza's of the three big bads in Modern, I think Urza's Saga is the least likely to get banned. And I think there's cards that aren't even in conversations, like Dragon Rage Channeler, Mishra's Bauble, and even Solitude that are more likely to be banned before Urza Saga is. And it doesn't need Ragavan, so that's not, you're lowering on that risk. And if Lurrus goes away, this deck existed before Lurrus was around. Lurrus helped, and is a piece of it. But I honestly think Lurrus is one of the reasons the deck isn't doing better than it is, because of the fact that even if I make you discard something, you can get it back with Lurrus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially since in most matchups you see nowadays, if both sides have Lurrus, that can be kind of a fool's errand, right? So, yeah.
Well, and your opponent's probably a little bit more ahead than you are, because you're buying discard spells and they're buying threats, removal spells, and stuff that you made them discard. So you're like 2 cards behind their one, and the mana you spent to cast it. So, So anything else on 8-Rack before we jump into the world of lore?
Not really. It was so nice to go down this little road with you. I haven't thought about my little 8-Rack deck in a long time. I'll just have to take it back out and be like, "Aw, you're so old now. I need to update you with Lurrus."
Yeah, we're in the Urza Sagas and the Lurrus.
By the way, it's so funny. I don't know if you know Ali Steele, formerly Ali Medwin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she actually designed Urza Saga and she designed Atraxa. So I think she's now like what, 2 for 2 for like ridiculously powerful cards.
Yeah. That's fine. It's a good contribution to.
Yeah. Thanks, Sally. I love you.
Doing well. Actually, like, I wish Urza Saga was maybe not as ubiquitous in where it's showing up, but I think it's doing good things for the format. I think from a power level perspective, it's fine. I think it's more just its color. Like, it's not that it's colorless; it's just it's a land. I like almost think it's just. And I understand the problem here is there isn't enough space on the typeface to have this. But if it was legendary, I think I'd be less worried about it, because you can't like play multiples. But I think it's fine. I like Urza Saga. I think it's a cool card. The fact that the format like has answers to it, and the fact that if you spreading season Urza Saga, it murders it immediately, is like something I like really love.
Okay. Yay.
So yeah, we figured it out.
Nice.
All right, so let's talk about lore. I guess I can.
Yeah.
You start.
Gosh.
Or I can do a whole lead into it.
Go ahead. This is your show. Cool. Have fun.
Magic lore exists. One of the reasons I'm as excited to get you on is because I love talking about magic lore, and Ben hates it. Partially from a perspective that he just doesn't know anything, and there's so much different stuff, and it's really fascinating too, because like I would say. I have a TikTok and make a bunch of content there as well. If you don't follow me, listeners, you should. TikTok at Kess Wiley, whatever. But lore videos there are some of my best performing ones. I think people do love lore, and it's so interesting, especially for new players, where I think a lot of them are on TikTok. There's a lot of lore that they don't know. And part of that is also because if you're a new player that joined basically since Magic Arena has been added to the format, which that has brought in a lot of new players, Magic lore has been weird since then. to be kind. Today I wanted to talk a little bit of like what's happened since Magic Arena kind of launched in the world of lore. Why the success of Magic Arena has kind of caused this problem to happen, where like the success of it put too many eggs forward. To me, it feels like, and then that was what caused a lot of problems. And now we're just getting back to getting what it used to be, and the era really literally since like right before that, which was like Ixalan and the preempt of getting into the War of the Spark, where I think Magic was at its peak in storytelling. Yeah.
we're getting better. It's getting better, which is exciting, which is really, really exciting. Let's start when Ixalan came out. Ixalan came out what, 2018? something like that.
Before times.
The before times. In the before times, there was a time where you could just read lore and it was good. So Ixalan, it was always frustrating for me because it was both a draft format that I absolutely hated and a lore, and they also had the best lore of any of the previous stories we've seen. At this point, all of the lore had been written in-house, and Alison Loris decided to finally take it upon herself and just write this behemoth of, I think it was 10 stories, 10, 12 stories, covering basically all the events of Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, which was really amazing and incredible. And I think it just really gave us a hint of what, lore could really be. The very old history of lore, when we talk about things like Urza stuff, old Dominaria stuff, old Phyrexia stuff, we have things like novels and stuff like that. But oftentimes a lot of folks nowadays, including myself, don't feel a lot of connection to the old lore just because it really hasn't aged very well.
It's great in the way that lore in Lord of the Rings dictates the story that's told in Lord of the Rings, or
it's a foundational thing. It's one of the bricks.
The ruins, and there's hints of what those stories were. But if you actually read those stories, they're not good.
Yeah, you're just why so much singing? Why?
The Silmarillion is very messy, but because it exists, you're able to tell stories where you walk through the mines of Moria, and it feels like there's decades of content there. That this is an actually lived in space. And I think that is one of the strengths of Magic, is that there's 30 years of storytelling, and some of it is very messy, but it builds weight to the decisions when it's used correctly of what's happening now. And Nicol Bolas is a good example. Phyrexians are a good example of those, where not only do you have modern day storytelling of it, but you can look at what happened before and theorize on what that means.
And the thing too that I think has become it's been really great about modern storytelling within Magic is that there is now a return to consistency with regards to characters and what it's because in the past that was definitely a challenge, and it remains still somewhat of a challenge as we get one writer versus another, but we depending on who was writing things back in the day, Sisay would be super badass, and then the next thing is oh no, Sisay is not badass anymore and has to be rescued, and you're just but I don't understand. So now there's a much more consistent effort being put into consistent character portrayal. Not only that, but I think there's also a recognition of the power of story. I think in a lot of ways Wizards is taking note of what other gaming companies have done. We've had games like Diablo, World of Warcraft, League of Legends, Hearthstone, a ton of other, Skyrim, Fallout. All of these games are successful because there is a very strong, consistent, deep narrative that drives the game forward. And while Magic the Gathering doesn't require that for its gameplay, I think what it's finally understanding is that, like MSG, investing in it really deepens the flavor of your game.
Well, also, it builds the brand, right? Halo, if you're just looking at the first-person multiplayer aspect of it, would not have the same amount of legs if it didn't have people that were so invested in the story that they bought every single sequel because they wanted to see what happens next, that they bought, reams of comics and books, etc. That's the extended universe of that lets them feel more connected to the characters that are going on. I think Mark Rosewater used to refer to Magic in eras, and he always kind of references it in how sets were designed and how they holistically saw sets. And to me, the actual underlying thing with that is almost how stories were told, because in the early days of Magic, you just made shit. Most names in the game were amalgams of different
Asmodee Nevinral's disc is literally just Larry Niven's name backward.
Yeah, Morrow is a card in Magic because Mark Rosewater's name is Morrow, right? So it's a that was the first era, and then Mark who came from TV, pitched the idea of Tempest block, and that had Exodus and Mirage, and eventually go into Urza Saga, which was like the beginning of holistic storytelling. And then that led into the era of like the novels, which were the like Akroma, a Corona False God, Kamal Pit Fighter era of Magic that like had a lot of the really swinginess that went back and forth of like who's telling the story, what it means. And that is one of the flaws, I think. And I think that when I kind of said Arena kind of brought us back to that era. And I think one of the problems with that era and consistency of characters is Magic is a game first. And what happens in Magic and how Magic cards are designed are a much more fluid process until print. Books can't be that. If I'm writing a novel, what happens in that story gets locked in at different moments and from a different perspective of why these things work this way versus a weekly, almost blog-esque story release, which I think has been the best eras of Magic story, has way more versatility. Oh, Liliana in this card art we got is blowing up the Chain Veil to defeat Nicol Bolas. Let's make sure we include that in a story instead of it ignoring it. Or, Luca shows up on all of these cards and gets along with the character, like is an animal person who likes animals. Let's not include the story where he abuses them and doesn't like them in the version of it.
that was I think one of the most ridiculous things. I love Decora's story, Django Wexler. And I think that's sort of the thing too. Like we used to have a consistent group of people who wrote the story. But I do think once they started contracting folks to bring to write those stories I think were only as successful as the team preparing and editing and really just setting up those writers for success, and two, how well those writers were able to write under these very different conditions, right? Because like a lot of these writers, for example, Martha Wells, who is an award-winning writer, like all of her stuff with Murderbot, 100% recommend. Really fantastic and actually extremely different than her work in Magic the Gathering. I personally feel like there was not a lot of room for success for her because there was just so much to do and not a lot of room to breathe.
Which story did she write?
She did Dominaria. There were a couple of stories, like Teferi's story, that I thought were perfect. And then there were a few that were just like, how did you end up here in this story? I was like, and now Gargle's gonna show up. I'm like, what?
And a little bit of the problem with Dominaria as a storytelling device is that that's not what that set was about. Yeah. Like it was kind of meant to be like, and I'm a big believer that like villains make a story like in all genres. And it's not that you can't have a good story where a villain isn't important, but especially in hot, like tropey genres like fantasy, the villain to me is like one of the key features. And we were in the middle of the Nicol Bolas saga, right? We had finished the Eldrazi saga that led right into Nicol Bolas being the main villain. We had left Amonkhet having, all of our little squad of friends being defeated. We did Ixalan, kind of showing the ramifications of that and also showing the pieces of what his plan is. And then we go to Dominaria and not like kind of this Black Blade storyline happens that ends up being kind a red herring.
Rosenlock is there.
Liliana's story is kind of a piece to that, which was important, but it was also more about like, we're going back to Dominaria. Let's reset up the setting. And kind of like, which I appreciate, was setting up the next story in the same way that, that felt more like, we need to get Dominaria back because there's no way to do a Phyrexian story without the history we previously mentioned of Dominaria being involved. Mm-hmm. That would feel weird and empty. And so let's reestablish that. And that's good. Like right now, one of the last things I want to talk about, not now, but when we get a little bit later in the podcast, is like what the future of storytelling is going to be.
Absolutely. We're going to get Brothers War, and I'm very excited about that.
And where that goes. But yeah, so Arena happened, and they're like, we're making infinite dollars. And what other properties do is, Halo is doing it. They release novels. Like their story is more official than ours are. Let's, instead of having an in-house team that's working with the designers and knows what's going on and built the worlds that we're going into, let's hire outside people. And you have a communication error, not communication error, but you just have a lacking of communication with those two teams.
Yeah, I think there was just not, honestly, I feel like I think the greatest contrast of success was the handling of war, is in the handling of the War of the Spark story. There were two writers, Nikki Drayden and Django Wexler, both incredibly talented writers who I think were just successful in their imaginings of Ravnica. I think in spite of a lot of things. I think because they had more freedom. They're also seasoned writers. Like if you look at both of their resumes, Django Wexler has been known for his Flintlock fantasy series, starting with a thousand. I think I can't remember all the names of his books, but they're really good and you should read them. It's basically the Napoleonic Wars, but magic and necromancy. Super cool. And Nikki Drayden has also done quite a few award-winning novels as well, including Temper and The Prey of the Gods. When they brought in Greg Weisman does have quite a pedigree. But ultimately, I do think he was not the correct person for the job because his background was very much in television writing and comics. These are two different mediums. I think what you want to bring in for what is basically going to be the apex of emotional, traumatic experiences for these characters you've grown to love and know over like years, right? This is supposed to be the zenith of the plot that we've been following for a really long time.
It was Wizards Avengers Endgame. I mean, like
it was Avengers Endgame, but not that much though.
Well, so here's like my biggest frustration with War of the Spark, right? Is if you ignore the book and you experience it as it was experienced by most players paying attention to the story up to that point and through preview season, because the Cole set was previewed and then the book came out, and it is Wizards' greatest preview season of all time. Like I will defend the War of the Spark story from that perspective because they told the story through preview cards, through content creators chronologically. Like every single card had a previewer and they were released in a chronological order that told the story from beginning to end in a way that has not been done maybe since Tempest, where that was also done in Tempest, where every piece of artwork was the next step. And that story is amazing. The actual story told on the cards.
Yeah. It's amazing because I mean you really get to see a plane go to war, right?
Right.
And especially one of the best, like my favorite plane is Ravnica, and it is something to see that the guilds finally come together and like fight, like seeing the various the various guilds. Like there was a cycle of like pairs of guilds coming together and like fusing their symbols into one and being like, we're gonna fight the zombies. That was great.
Well, and even like the subsequent cards of Gideon, like grabbing the Black Blade, jumping on the Pegasus getting shot by Oketra, him falling and then Rakdos catching him riding Rakdos to stab Nicol Bolas, and then Nicol Bolas destroying the Black Blade, being like, no.
Enough of this foolishness.
It's like such a great series of cards. And then that leads to like Liliana sacrificing herself to fight Nicol Bolas, and then Gideon sacrificing himself to save, like all of that. Amazing. The story of War of the Spark is an amazing story if you don't read the book.
Yes, please do not read the book. The book was bad.
Yeah.
It was. And the thing is, like, actually, like
the second one that was worse.
The second one was just strictly offensive in every sense of the word. It was just straight up offensive, and biphobic and terrible. But I think that's the thing, though, because when you read War of the Spark, the novel, it reads to me much more like a television script. Like this happens and this happens and this happens, this happens. There's some witty things here and there. There's a couple of moments that do work, but as a whole, when I compare it to The Gathering Storm is, I think, one of that together with Nikki Drayden's short stories, I think does a beautiful job conveying the diversity of a city.
That's the lead up short stories that led to the, like, between I always forget now. Keeping Ravnica, the second Ravnica set of that block.
Yeah, yeah. Guild, and then Allegiance. I think that was what Guilds of Ravnica and then Allegiance. It was so good because, as someone who lived in a city, as someone who lives in a city, you get to experience kind of every single part of it, and I think they really got that whole thing, the hugeness of the plane. And, Greg Weisman was not really there. Like I didn't get the feeling of a plane wide war. I got like, okay, we're in like a studio set, we're in, like Pinewood. I don't know. One of those other studios, Pinehurst.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I do want to defend, at least on my end, my like opinions on this book, because like there's a version of it where it's like, oh, you guys are just hating on, like, because this is corporate fiction, right? And corporate fiction classically is significantly worse than non-corporate fiction, not like the Halo books and Star Wars books. It doesn't have to be. Well, that's my point. Is I'm also a person who has read, up until Disney buying them, every single Star Wars book. And there are bad ones, there are good ones. I read every single Halo book until I stopped reading them. Yeah. But I read my
share of like Star Trek books. Imzadi makes me cry.
Right. And so this isn't for the perspective of like, this book is bad, but like all books of this type are bad. This is the perspective like these books can be great, and a lot of them are very good, and this one is particularly worse than those.
Yes, it's. I mean, whenever I compare books, like I compare like written stuff like this, I don't compare it to like within its genre. I guess I compare it to like other fantasy, like other genre fiction books that I've read. So like I don't know if it's fair for me to compare this to say like N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became, but like that's where I am.
Right.
Those are my reference points, because I've seen it be that good. Like we've seen it be that good, and that was why it was so sad that happened, and then Forsaken happened, the book of which we shall not speak.
Right.
But since then, we have seen a really great and concerted effort from Wizards of the Coast to reinvigorate lore.
And that's the one thing I like always give Wizards a little bit of a not a limb, but I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt throw them a bone, benefit of the doubt on a timeline perspective, right? I think they heard everyone on this, and not do I think that, I know that, because they then immediately buried and hid the book that was for Theros Beyond Death, to the extent that it does not exist, even though it was written.
Yeah, it was written, and then they were like, yeah, we're not going to release that.
All of the problems we have with the Forsaken are worse here.
Yes.
And so that will never see the light of day. They then kind of, like, the Ixalan story came out, but it was a digital release. They like very much slowed down for the year that they had already made, because they have that 2-year planning cycle. And then once you get to a year and a half and beyond for the Spark, it starts picking up pretty significantly. Now, to me, feeling like we're culminating again in Kamigawa, where once again we have these short stories that are very well connected and very well done. We have a lot more care to not just the story they're telling, but the world they're returning to, and the places that they need to respect by returning to this world. And there's definitely places for improvement. They can get better than even where they're at. But in a lot of ways, you see the ramifications of them listening to people and the problems that they had during that moment, where, our biggest storyline of all time had major issues, and how do we fix it in the future?
Yeah, I definitely felt that response as well, with, I think, more recently Strixhaven. So I definitely had a lot of issues with one of the characters, a couple of the characters in the Strixhaven, namely Killian Liu and his dad from Silver Quill, and just from the perspective of Asian representation within media. I was on another podcast, Asians Represent, where we talked extensively about this and how damaging things like, tiger parents, etc., and that sort of stereotype can be like, especially in this day and age where we are seeing a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. And so, and I what was really great was that I was so worried that we might see a reprise of that come Kamigawa, because we are coming back to a plane that is inspired directly by Japanese culture, by Japanese history. And so, given the past performance of Watsi in Kamigawa, I think I speak for a lot of folks when I say that I was like, holding my breath and just like, I really hope that I don't have to spend the next 2 months being angry because I'd really like to do other things, like bake or draw or make Legos. Like these are all things. Pet my cat. Pet my other cat. These are all things I'd rather do with my time than like create op-eds about like why this is actually incredibly detrimental to representation and whatnot. So I think that leads us to Kamigawa, where we have really, I think, a really compelling story. We're definitely laying down the like the ground for another big arc, and I think this time we're seeing the Phyrexians. Like we saw Vorinclex doing his Vorinclex thing on Kaldheim. I love that as each of the Praetors is showing up and having their little cameo, they're making things wrong and only the way they can do as themselves. So like Vorinclex is just literally like running around the forest, like just yeeting things and like just crashing through, just being like some kind of rabid linebacker. Whereas Jin-Gitaxias is like, I will create all of these experiments and see what I can do with these kami.
The funny thing is, like, there's always been like thirstiness for Elishnorn and for, reasons that are obvious, but I didn't expect that to then just extend to all of the Praetors as they are given their moments to shine one by one. And the fact that
turns out Jin-Gitaxias has just been Shapiro.
The voiceover in there was, I was like, oh wow.
Oh my God.
I was like, oh, you're right. Oh, now I can never not read that in that voice, and that hurts me. But it's well, and I think that is the other thing that didn't hurt the story, but was like a weird moment, right? Is that War of the Spark happened, and then they had to do this whole readjustment in story at the same moment that they were going through kind of what Marvel did the same thing after Endgame, which is this is the breathing out moment. You don't go from one arc into another one. You seed stuff in there. You start setting up for future arcs. You just show what happened to the characters that weren't in the arc. Like we got to see what happened to Garrick, and we got to set up Oko as a future major villain, and we went to Strixhaven to see what Liliana is doing in the meantime, and you get all of these like small stories. But now we're like, oh, we're back. And we didn't even realize we were back. We knew the Brothers War in Dominaria was happening, but we all thought like, oh, we're just going to see a flashback and return. Oh no, it's the year of Phyrexia.
Yeah. No, that's what's exciting about this, right? And I love the way you phrased it. It's just like, it's kind of like we slipped back into this deep end of the pool without even realizing it, right? Because yeah, you were correct. Like for a while, Eldraine was fantastic. Kate Elliott came back for that. For that story and just knocked it out of the park. And we got to meet the twins, Kenrith, and oh my goodness,
Will and
Rowan. Right, Kenrith is his dad. My bad. It's been a long time since I thought about Eldraine. Clearly, I'm just so excited about Kamigawa. It's just sort of like I just remember like call time story coming in, and also like wait. No, it's the big green guy. What does this mean?
Well, he kind of didn't do, because also up to this point, Phyrexian has been this infectious problem. So, even to the extent that like they found oil on Ixalan in a commander set at some point, like in Commander Legends, is Ixalan going to be Phyrexianized? They're like, no, it's just
that's just dinosaurs. That's just dinosaurs. Don't worry, that's just liquid dinosaur.
You might do a Wild West thing maybe with it or something, but like it's not Phyrexia. They need oil in them hills.
But yeah, no, it's so cool to kind of see what is happening next. And I think one of the successes of one of the reasons why story has been successful the past few sets is because I think there is concerted effort to make it so, right? Within WotC. I think for the longest time, and from my conversations with other Wizards folks, like for the longest time, story was just sort of this thing that someone did on their own time. Like if you remember this Plane Shift, or the art books, like that was just James Wyatt, like on his own, being like, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna make it into a book, and then no one really else had bandwidth for it. And now it seems like they're actually investing resources and people into maintaining and creating this whole product line. And it's actually this whole not product line, but this whole storyline for their brand, which is great, right? Because as we've seen with Marvel and other properties, like it makes sense to invest in your story. Your story makes things flavorful. It is the MSG of your brand, of your product line. Like, get it in there. People are invested.
Well, and now you have a brand, right? I mean, then that comes down to the like corporate overlord Hasbro situation too, where it's like by having a story, you now can license this out to people. People will buy action figures of the characters. The introduction of Planeswalkers to begin with, and the entire reason Time Spiral Block happened was because they realized that they need their face characters to be relatable and not weird ethereal god people. And they need to be on cards, and they need to be, you know, stuff that you can actually like tell stories around. And that's where the Lorwyn 5 were introduced. That's then where, you know, the next 4 characters they introduced became major pieces of it. And that's the era that set up literally the next almost 20 years of Magic storytelling. The time spiral into Lorwyn, into Zendikar with the Eldrazi being introduced, into, or Shards of Alara introducing Nicol Bolas, into Zendikar introducing the Eldrazi, into new Shards of Mirrodin reintroducing the Phyrexians, is the Magic story of literally almost every single set that we've had since Time Spiral Block. And that's, I think, also one of the really interesting things with New Phyrexia happening is this is the third major story arc in Magic, really, in at least modern Magic. And when it ends, that era of setup also ends. We're now past that. We now have a future where what's next, and that doesn't. And I'm really excited by it. And I'm also like, now I'm like looking at, okay, who's the next big bads? Who have they set up in this like weird downtime period to be? Because I think that also happened after War of the Spark. I know I'm like ADDing in the sentence, but this is a very long run on sentence. In War of the Spark, they finished an arc and they realized, oh crap, we only have one more left.
Yeah, we've gotta bring that band back. And that big metal band.
Yeah, we have to, and what can we do in the next like year and a half to set up some new bands that they get to fight against after?
Yeah,
it's metal.
Like Oko. I mean, God, can you imagine if Oko got Phyrexianized next?
Oh yeah, I don't. So my opinion on Oko is he's safe from complete. Well, for 2 reasons. One, because Tamiyo is the one that got completed, the blue-green Planeswalker completion space has been eaten up, so it's unlikely for the other blue-green ones, because all of them sound terrifying. Kiora Phyrexianized sound terrifying.
Oh, God. Just like all these Phyrexianized octopuses coming to eat you.
Don't need that.
No, we don't need that. We don't need that anymore.
But I think like, and you know, I think they brought in Oko because they thought it was a cool character, and then I think the fact that Oko became Jace the Mind Sculptor 2.0 means that the chances that Oko isn't one of the next biggest villains to do something in the future is low. I think he is one of the next Phyrexian arc, Nicol Bolas arc level characters. I'm excited by that because I don't know how you take Trickster God and transform him into worldwide Nicol Bolas planar event. But we'll see. I think go. Sorry.
I mean, I can definitely see that because he's supposed to be based on the Fae, right? And the Fae are there. I think what is nice about Oko is that there's a level of chaos to him that that Bolas never quite had. Bolas is very measured in most of his dealings, where I think Oko is very mischievous.
Yeah, right. We have with Nicol Bolas, we have intent. With the Phyrexians, we have intent again, and the Eldrazi were probably the closest to chaos, but they were like an instinct-based chaos. They're just like hunger and destruction. There was no like planning, with maybe Nahiri with Emrakul being the closest to that. Mm-hmm. And with Oko, you have the potential to like, oh no, I'm Joker-esque, which is he's probably closest to, in like, oh, I'm doing this because I want to make people suffer, and I don't care how it happens, so I'm willing to do it in any way.
Mm-hmm. And then there was like the voice in the Ozolith, which we haven't actually really.
It got into right.
Yeah, no one knows what that is.
I do think Luca's being completed. That's my.
Oh no, I 100%. I would see Luca completed. I'm just like, you know what? Couldn't have happened to him. Actually, no, it did happen to Tamio, but which is like, no. I was shocked when that. I was like, no, when that happened. I was so sad. I had to draw my feelings out and just like made a portrait of her. And I'm like, I'm so sad.
I literally like I was in a work call and someone else, Michael, who co-hosts the podcast, works with me as well, and he was like, "Oh, so the magic cards." I was like, "Oh, I haven't looked at it yet. Let me look at it." And like, "Oh, that's a cool card. Oh, the Wanderer is back. That's cool. Oh no,
oh no, Mom!" It's like, you gotta get Mom back.
Which like I also loved that was like, and I got in arguments on TikTok and Twitter about this as it happened. It was like, this is a good thing. It's a bad thing, but the fact that I'm reacting this way is a good thing. This was like and there's like, there's conversation on like, the person they decided to do this with has specific things that they represent in Magic that it's sad that we lost. But I also think that like completion is not death and that character no longer exists. It's corruption. So this character Tamio is not gone. We are going to get more Tamio. It's just scary Tamio, not Tamio.
scary scientist research Tamio who thinks of other Phyrexians as her family, which is just terrifying. It's just absolutely terrifying.
So other than I guess Luca and Tamio, who do you think is most likely to be completed?
Oh God. I mean, I don't think Garrick. We've put Garrick through enough.
So there's characters like I don't think Elspeth could ever be completed. We've already killed her and brought her back.
Yeah, we've killed her. Yeah, there's certain planeswalkers we've already put through the ringer. I mean, I think Ashiok would actually be very interesting.
Last time we saw them, they were going to Phyrexia. They saw. I
actually don't think Ashiok has pronouns. I think it's just Ashiok.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah.
No worries.
Last time Ashiok was seen, Ashiok read Elspeth's mind, saw the nightmare that is the Phyrexians, and was like, that looks neat.
And then it's like, I want to go see that. And so I totally would think like they showed up and they're like, ooh, such nightmares to feast upon. And then they were like, you want to join? And then Ashiok, I don't know how Ashiok would respond to that. But I would put a couple of bucks on Ashiok coming up completed, filling up the mono black or black blue thing. I don't think Davriel Kane.
He maybe just so I like did a thing where I like tried finding one for every 2 color pair, and black white and was the one that I had the most trouble kind of figuring out because I don't think Sorin gets completed. I don't think that does anything.
Kaya, I don't think.
Kaya, I think, is being set up as a main character in a way that would not benefit the story for Kaya to become completed. I think that and those are only 2 black-white planeswalkers currently really in Magic that are of super relevant. So then it's like looking at mono-white and mono-black ones and which ones can work. And Davriel maybe, but also I think he's a cooler character for future other stories. I think Tibalt is and I think he already is.
Yeah, Tibalt is definitely probably going to be already completed.
Especially because he's also redundant with Oko in a lot of ways. It's like a good use of him, and then you get rid of him, and now Oko can be the trickster pain god planeswalker.
I mean, it could set up a really interesting story dynamic, right? If like Oko has to work with the good guys.
Sure.
Ooh, he's a wild card. He's a loose cannon.
I think actually to me, Tezzeret, I don't Tezzeret's a weird one. That's another one where I almost feel like there's a chance that Tezzeret ends up being set up as the continuation of Phyrexia post this. Like he doesn't get completed in the story arc of the Praetors being defeated, but he then is the next step in keeping Magic's greatest villain of all time alive for the 3rd time they have to fight him in 30 years. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really cool. There's one. A lot of people really like the idea of a Johnny being Phyrexianized when I posted this.
I could see that. I can see that. And I also think it would be incredibly sad. I don't know. I'm also just like, but heroic intervention.
Right. Well, I had dollars on him dying in War of the Spark, right?
I thought he would also die because every mentor, he's a mentor character,
he's
right?
the Obi-Wan Kenobi of Magic. It's him and Teferi, and Teferi had just been brought back and had a lot more stories to tell. Where a Johnny kind of doesn't have anything to do.
I like that expression on your face. Just,
kill him.
Johnny is just like, Cat Dad's done.
Nicol Bolas is dead. I mean, maybe there's a story on Alara to tell. Do you need a Johnny for that? Like every other character has been to ban at some point.
What do you think of Ugin? What if Ugin got completed?
I think Ugin would be interesting. But to me, Ugin's like in my head a next villain.
Really? Yeah, I had that thought too.
I think he's like
well, he's an old walker, right? All old walkers are assholes.
Correct. I like he's like the representation of why centrism is evil. Where he like has been involved with every major bad guy, and he's the reason that he had a moment to stop all of them and decided not to on purpose.
He decided to like suddenly do, what was it, like Attenborough's principle, like even if you morally object to something, you can't like involve yourself,
right?
Which is like, are you like, great, I guess. I don't know. In my head, ever since I've heard that phrasing, I'm like, David Attenborough is the voice of Ugin now.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. So yeah, and I think the last one I wanted to mention is Koth, and that's the one that I actually think doesn't get completed. I think Koth is showing up in the like twilight hour of this story as the like Ash from the Evil Dead, or what's her face from Terminator, the Sarah Connor from Terminator, where he's been fighting this fight for like 20 years and is like somehow survived. And like, because I think because they just said Tommy was the first time they've done this, so they haven't done it to him yet. And so if he's still around, they didn't kill him either. And so I think he just shows up and he's like, I'm the one that has been doing this. Let's go.
Do you think Urabrask is going to be like dead, or do you think he's going to just also be centrist? Or
I don't think any of the Praetors are dead. I think I'm a hardcore, because I know everyone's like Urabrask is dead and Elish Shieldred is dead, and I don't think you kill from a business perspective. They have very, very, very strong worth as like villains and characters that they've established, and having to reestablish them sounds like a mistake when you can just include them in ways that makes more sense. And I
can certainly see, like, because Elishorn did go after Shieldred. I can see like Shieldred coming back, but like extremely modded in such a way that she is now following Elishorn's like faction, which makes sense. And I think that is something I'm looking forward to reinvestigating and reanalyzing, like how has New Phyrexia evolved since the last time we got there.
And I do think Shieldred, because Atraxa, right? Atraxa is
not red.
Not red. So it definitely has the vibe of like black has come into line, and I think just Urabrask is going to be the one that like has been around. I don't think we'll see Urabrask until we go back to New Phyrexia. I think we get Shieldred literally in New Capenna, and I think we get Elish Norn in Dominaria United, and then we go back to the Brothers' War. We see whatever weapon they're going to find in the past and establish in Phyrexia, and then next spring is going to be New Phyrexia, the war on Phyrexia, and we're going to get all of that business, and the Weatherlight's going to show up, and that's where Urabrask is, and Koth is going to be there,
and then Karn will finally open up his duffel bag and like take out
the weapon we found in the Brothers' War.
Yes,
and then we'll go, and then that'll all end, and then we'll take a nice jaunt in Middle Earth for the Lord of the Rings set, and then I guess we're fighting Oko.
Oh, right. We're doing Lord of the Rings. I forgot about that. I'm actually really excited about that. I actually have a giant Hobbit poster.
And I'm like, I'm hyped. I've heard good things from behind the curtain. And
me too.
And I also I think people are a little worried because it's a Modern Horizons level set, right? It's directly being printed into Modern. So from that perspective, people are like, I don't want a card that's like been designed to be Modern playable, but is also Gandalf. I don't care. I think that's as ridiculous as other things we're getting. But we've had entire episodes on that, and we don't have time to go over the entire.
No worries.
What Wizards Beyond is going to look like, because that is a lot. Multiple.
No worries. I just want to briefly exclaim that I am excited. I'm excited for all the rings.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I'm also very excited for the new show. Like there's definitely,
yes.
I don't know if you saw the like 26 posters they released this morning.
Yes, I saw some of them. I'm very excited.
Dived into TikToks being like, this is who every one of these characters are based on the type of embroidery on their sleeves. I'm like, yes, this is why we like Lord of the Rings. All right, so that is the time we have today. First off, thank you so much for joining. I know we've been trying to get you on now for a few whiles, and so I'm glad we've been able to finally do it. Where can people find you on the internet?
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at KilnFiendPotter. And you would also find me on Instagram at KilnFiendPottery. That's where I mostly show a lot of my ceramics works, because I am also an artist. I sometimes forget about that. You can also find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/KilnFiendPotter, where I will be doing like a very cute, like just chilling and crafting stream where I'm just going to assemble Legos and like talk to people. You can come and hang out. Very low, like, life is hard. Come hang out. Come build stuff with me. Let's build some flowers. Yeah. Let's talk about lore. So yeah, that's pretty much the 3 main places. You can also find some of my TTRPG actual play stuff, because I do a lot of D&D stuff now too. So I'm on Magic with Zuby's Price of Progress D&D campaign, where I play basically a Dragonborn Karen. You can find it on Wednesday evening. So if you just check out Zuby's Twitter, you can find out the links and whatnot. And yeah, check me out as I basically scour this new world trying to disrupt a multi-level marketing operation.
Awesome. And then yeah, as far as we go, all the links are below as always. Please hit that like button. And I do want to hear all of your thoughts on who you think will be completed in the future. Put them in those comments. And then last but not least, if you're buying anything on TCG Player, there's an affiliate link in below. Please click on that before going there. And then you can get help the podcast there as well. All of the things. And once again, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, listeners, as always. And thank you, patrons. And we'll talk to all of you next week. And then we'll be back. So we'll be doing our Kamigawa set review. And that'll